Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer morning briefing with myself here, Liam Bryce, with Patrick McPartlin, as always, as we take a look back at Saturday's 1-0 defeat up in Perth against St Johnstone, and then a wee look ahead to what comes next for Hibs, which is another away day, another jaunt, this time away up to Dingwall to face Ross County. But before we get to that, we'll have a look back over Saturday's game. And unfortunately, from a Hibs perspective, there wasn't an awful lot to like about it, Patrick, was there?
I think I'd probably go as far to say there was nothing to like about it. It was, I think, arguably the most disappointing performance since Montgomery took the reins. Just really kind of disjointed, really kind of drab, dreary, lots of other negative words, just really kind of uninspiring. And I think in the context of, 7 days after they sort of recorded a gritty win against Livingston in, similar conditions, away from home again, a place they've struggled to go in the past. It was a little bit baffling, I think, to see them. I mean, most of the starting 11 was the same between the two games, and it was just really, I think, a bit surprising to see just, what was like a really kind of insipid performance. I mean, no shots on target and not an awful lot to like about it. There wasn't a lot in midfield. There wasn't, I mean, you've got, a front four that includes Eli Yuan, Martin Boyle, Jair Tavares, Dylan Vente, and, nothing came from them. There was, nothing that made you think, could get back into this when they went one down, or even that they were, kind of at the races before St Johnstone's goal. I think one of the things I've noticed with this Hibs team, and with Hibs teams in the past as well, is that you can usually tell within the first 5 or 10 minutes of a game if they're at it. And I think Perth on Saturday was very much a case of looking at the first 5 or 10 minutes and thinking, yikes, because it just wayward passes, people were slow to second balls. It was just really kind of sort of typical midwinter fare. On a pitch that wasn't great in pretty poor weather conditions. So I think not a huge sort of surprise the final result given the performance. I think what probably was surprising was just how kind of uninspiring and poor it was when I think there's not really been too many displays like that under Montgomery since he came in.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think it's the worst performance of his tenure so far. I don't think anybody could argue with the result, and I think you've kind of alluded to it there. I feel like even in other games where Hibs haven't played particularly well throughout, even when they losing 4-0 at Ibrox, losing 4 at Celtic Park, they've always showed something. Even in those games, I felt like that there was still, maybe wee bits and pieces here and there that you could pick out and think, right, okay, generally it wasn't great, but this is still a team in the sort of early stages of a transition. You can take positives from maybe this or that, but I didn't really see anything in that on Saturday, and it was one of those games that I think even before kick-off, you're thinking, you look at all the elements of it all coming together and thinking this could potentially be quite hazardous. Middle of a kind of a tough run of away games, another kind of horrible day for football, pitch not the best, your captain's missing, and then we don't really need to go into the Craig Levein factor thrown in to that as well. That sort of being reunited with a familiar foe element of it. And there was just it was just a really kind of bad day at the office. I think Montgomery used those words himself. He didn't try and shy away from how kind of poor it was. He did say afterwards that he didn't think Hibs deserved to win, but he said they probably didn't deserve to lose. I think it's maybe one of the first times I've quite strongly disagreed with him on something like that. I don't think they deserved anything from it at all. And so we'll have a piece on the website later on today, kind of drilling into the numbers, the trends throughout the game, if you can stomach reading that. But it's the kind of it very much aligns up with the eye test of what we saw on Saturday. Some of the numbers and the Hibs performance aren't great. It's kind of no surprise, I think, for anybody to learn it was a sort of lowest expected goals tally of the season so far. Stats bomb that we use had that down as just 0.14 overall, and then from open play it was even lower at 0.04, and that really does sort of tally with what we saw on the pitch. And says we'll have more on this later, and I just think this kind of sums up just how much Hibs went at it. We can sort of track how that expected goals, how it it kind of rises throughout the game, just against the 90 minutes. And so the number after 90 minutes was 0.14, and that was the same as it was on 65 minutes, which kind of shows you that you'd expect at least some sort of late flurry or charge to try and get back into the game. But I don't know how you feel, but it just never felt like it was coming at any point, Patrick. I know there was a couple of maybe, minor stramashes in the box at one point. There was a late shout for a penalty against Chris Kane, but I thought that would have been very harsh against him, to be honest. And it just didn't feel like it was coming. And you could see it from the outset, I thought, to be honest. It just wasn't. It just didn't quite click at all. I think you kind of correctly highlighted midfield as being a bit of an issue, in the sense that I feel like we saw that. I feel like we saw this in a couple of the earlier games as well, but then Hibs managed to maybe overcome it, and just that I sort of struggled to link the midfield and the attack. I felt like both Dylan Levitt and Jimmy Jeggle were playing quite deep, almost kind of too close to each other at times. That's where you miss Joe Newell, isn't it? You wouldn't say he's an attacking midfielder as such, but he sort of brings a different dynamic, more of an attacking threat than Levitt and Jeggle would, I feel. And I think from there, the front four just really struggled to get into the game. And when you're kind of as toothless in attack as that, you are always, susceptible to being hit, on the counter, or in this instance, a pretty glaring error from Dylan Levitt. But it's just, I don't know how you could. It's one of those ones. Do you just put it down to a bad day at the office, or do you think, well, no, you kind of really need to expect a wee bit better? Because I think last week the gritty performance against Livingston, I think fans they're sort of more willing to be accepting of those kind of games where teams dig it out if they then back it up with a good performance afterwards, if to sort of draw a line under it. But then I don't know, maybe it's just me with 2020 hindsight that you then kind of look at the Livingston game a wee bit differently, because I feel like Hibs only played well for maybe about 15-20 minutes of that game. It's where they got the goal, and then I felt like maybe a lot of it out with that was kind of similar to what we saw for long periods on Saturday there. Am I being a bit harsh there, Patrick, or do you slightly agree?
I don't think you are. I think what I would say is that you look back at the previous performances, or the most recent performances, taking Celtic out of the equation. If you look at the the victories against Kilmarnock, Dundee, Livingston, there was an element in all of those games of Hibs were lucky there, and to a certain extent, yes, they were. You look at the sort of the VAR incident towards the end of the victory in Livingston. You look at the fact they went down to 10 against Dundee and managed to withstand a bit of a late onslaught, and against Kilmarnock as well. You look at the stats. We've got the data from StatsBomb, like you were saying, and it's all it's there in black and white that Kilmarnock had more chances, had more of the ball, and certainly looks like they might take something from it. And obviously they didn't, and in what is a results business, the 3 points ultimately is the only thing that matters. And I think when you look at successful teams, if you take Celtic and Rangers, for example, I think when you look back at previous seasons, some of the games that have made a difference for both teams have been when they've gone away to a difficult venue, be it McDiarmid Park, be it the Tony Macaroni, be it Dens Park or the Global Energy Stadium where Hibs are going this weekend. And it's not a vintage display, but they still managed to grind out a result. And in the end, it's all about, can you go there? Can you get the 3 points? Can you then use that to build on in the next game? And I think you're right when you say that. I mean, fans do forgive sort of backs to the wall, gritty performances. If it gets to 3 points, if there's then an obvious kind of uptick in the display the following game, and I don't think we saw that from Livingston to St Johnstone. I think the side they're just really kind of jaded. I thought. Just from the start, you could just tell. I mean, we've talked about the conditions. We've talked about the fact they were missing Joe Newell, and it's still a bit of a polarising figure with some sections of the support. But I think his absence on Saturday certainly showed just what he brings to this team. And it might not be a case that on his own he is the difference maker in this team, but I think you can look at him as the kind of glue that holds the rest of the squad together. Like we've seen him. Under Montgomery, we've seen him partner Levitt in the midfield. We've seen him partner Jeggo in the midfield. And both of those combinations work. And, on paper, then, Levitt and Jeggo surely should be a decent axis as well. But, they just weren't. And, as we know in football, just because something works on paper doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work on the pitch. But, the other element of Saturday's game was that, and just for Hibs in general, if Martin Boyle and Ellie Yuan in particular are not sort of at the races, then Hibs are very, very toothless. And when you take Joe Newell out of the equation as well, who, is really your only kind of midfielder at the moment, discounting Josh Campbell, who, doesn't seem to be being played as a central midfielder in the system, you don't really have anyone kind of bringing the ball forward, starting attacks, looking to get on the front foot. And I think it was particularly telling that 10 minutes into the second half, Montgomery brought Bashiri on for Paul Hanlon, and I think within 5 minutes Bashiri had sort of taken the ball and sort of driven forward into the middle of the park, and I think it actually led to a sort of rare attack for Hibs. And I think that probably highlights the problems that the squad has at the moment. And I think on top of that, the fact that the squad is so threadbare at the moment, you're missing Adam Lafondra. I think he's been sort of like, his absence has been keenly felt in the past few weeks, just that kind of experienced head in the final third. Obviously there's Lewis Miller looks like he's been struggling with illness, according to the manager. You've then you're still waiting on the likes of Jake Doyle-Hayes to come back. You're waiting on Chris Cadden, Harry McCurdy, people like that. So the squad is being stretched, and I think it's when Montgomery and the sort of physios and things are trying to manage players from game to game, like this player won't get risked if they're not 100%. Then it does almost become sort of fairly obvious what the issues were against St Johnstone, and I think that there wasn't a great deal on the bench. 3 subs were made. I think Josh Campbell coming on at right back instead of Rory Whittaker. You've got Jair Tavares being moved into midfield from out wide, and it's just it did sort of really feel like from Montgomery's position, there wasn't really a lot left that he could do. I know I see some fans on social media questioning some of the substitutions he makes. I think he's spoken before that it's not a case of we've got 11 players who play sort of 70-75 minutes and then we start subbing off if boys are tired. He's very much a kind of modern coach who likes to use the full squad of players that he's allowed to on a match day, to try and get the most out of games, to try and sort of manage players' game time, to try and turn games on their head in the hope of getting something out of it. So I think a lot of factors went into Saturday's defeat, none of which I think can excuse what was a pretty kind of poor performance. As I said earlier, I think it was something like 9 of the starting 11 in Perth was the same as it had been in Livingston. And you really want to be getting more from your players in games like this. Exactly the sorts of games that Hibs need to be winning on a regular basis if they do have designs on finishing third. And I think Montgomery's been. I think you could say that he has achieved a lot with this Hibs squad since he came in. I mean, 3 league defeats in I think it's 14 games, 2 of which were to Celtic and Rangers. Isn't it's not a bad return. And when you consider he's not had a full squad for that time. None of these players are his own signings, and a lot of them might not be particularly well suited for the system that he wants to play. But he still managed to get a tune out of them, and on a couple of occasions, St Mirren away, Dundee at home, Kilmarnock away in his first game. They've not been too far away from getting better results than they came out with. And if they had sort of held on for just a couple of minutes more, then their points tally would be looking a lot more respectable. I think they'd be fairly clear in third, and I think maybe only 6 or 7 points off Rangers in second. So when you look at it that way, it's not. Yes, Saturday was disappointing, but I think Montgomery is the kind of man who will look at performances like that. He takes full responsibility. I think he did that in Perth. He just sort of said, yeah, disappointing. That's on me. We go back to the training ground. We work on what didn't work out. And so far, like he's not followed up a league defeat with another defeat. He's obviously when they lost to Rangers, they then followed that up with a respectable goalless draw against Celtic at Easter Road. And when they lost against Celtic in midweek, obviously they went to Livingston and won. So he seems to be quite good at getting a reaction from his players, from getting them to kind of leave bad performances to one side rather than it sort of hanging over them into the next game. So on that basis, and aligned with the fact that you've got Joe Newell coming back, and time a sort of best part of a week to work on the training ground, I would be sort of fairly confident that it should at the very least be an improved performance in Dingwall on Saturday. Ideally they get the result as well. Going into the derby just before New Year, you really want a sort of positive performance and a positive result going into that. And you'd think, okay, there are limited players available at the moment due to injuries, but you would hope that that there'll be squad places up for grabs, first team spots up for grabs as well. We know Monty doesn't really like sticking to the same 11 week in, week out. I think the sort of pool of being able to contribute to a good performance and a good result in Dingwall, with a hope to sort of maybe put yourself into the manager's thoughts for a start in the derby should you would hope sort of spark some sort of reaction from the players.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, because the answer you would get if you asked anybody about that is, we only focus on the next game and stuff like that. But I think it's only human that when there's a big game coming up, that thoughts inevitably start drifting towards that in terms of wanting to put yourself in the frame to play in it. Just kind of maybe last point on Saturday there, the goal was probably particularly frustrating in that Hibs haven't played well. But at the same time, they have gifted St Johnstone the winner. They've not really. I think, in being honest, I think the goal was coming. Up until that point, David Marshall had made a few good saves. St Johnstone had they'd flashed a few really dangerous crosses across the face of goal. I think it was on the cards, but for it to come in that manner would have been particular. Yeah, but they've been particularly frustrating, and I suppose it's not going to. It's one of those ones that it's certainly not going to help win over anybody who still thinks that Hibs shouldn't be trying to play out from the back the way they are. But I suppose something like that happening when you are still trying to learn this way of playing was maybe not inevitable, but you're always kind of running that risk. I just watching it back, I couldn't quite understand what they were trying to do at that point, because there is usually a very kind of recognisable setup from that. Either it'll be the centre half starts the play, passes it to the goalie, or the goalie will pass it to one of the centre halves. But I'm just not sure what Dylan Levitt was doing coming back to take the ball there, because he is the guy that you want for not the first pass, the second pass. And then if you drop a midfielder in there, I don't know if he's just it's one of those ones where you're eager to make something happen. You want to get in, you want to get on the ball, you want to be the guy who gets the team moving. But it was just a strange one all round. The fact that he dropped into that space, because then it removes, he's removing himself from the equation as an option for somebody to pass out to, which, as I say, is where you kind of want him. And then he's tried quite an ambitious pass, and it's backfired, and it's a great finish as well from Graham Carey. I've seen Levitt taking a wee bit of stick, and obviously he'll take stick for the mistake. And Montgomery was quite, keen to protect him from that and say there's no blame attached. This is the way that the team's being asked to play, and obviously people are going to make mistakes. But just on a broader point in life, I have seen him taking a fair amount of criticism after Saturday, but I feel like I want to stick up for him a wee bit, because I feel like if this is the way that Hibs are going to be playing, this building through the thirds, I think Levitt's got a lot to offer in that sense. I feel like he was a wee bit off it in terms of St Johnstone's physicality at the weekend, but I think you kind of know what you're going to get with him. That's not going to be part of his game. But in terms of somebody who can get on the ball, can be composed on the ball, can link the play, I do think that he's got a lot to offer in that sense. And I feel like he faded out of the game in the second half, but I felt there were periods in the first half, at least, where he did look like perhaps the only person who was looking capable of making a decent forward pass. He played a few wide. He played a few kind of into the strikers first time. He does look after the ball well generally. I just think obviously it's a poor mistake, and nobody needs to you'll not need told twice about that. But I think he is very much a player that I think is worth sticking with. I think he's got a lot of talent. I'd maybe, you do wonder if he could maybe offer a wee bit more in terms of kind of attacking threat, because that's something that really caught the eye with him at Dundee United when he first went there, and you do wonder if there's more to come from him. But I kind of seen him taking a fair amount of stick, and I felt sort of compelled to stick up for him, because I do think he can be an important player. I just think he is the type that you maybe need to get the right players around him to draw the best from, because he's not going to be a battler, a ball winner. He is a kind of guy who wants to make passes, who picks up decent areas, and if he knows how to get on the ball in that area, he can get himself into decent wee pockets of space. I just, maybe I'm riding too much to his defence here, but I do think he has a lot to offer, and I'd be reticent to be too harsh on him for Saturday.
Yeah, I think, it's a difficult one for Montgomery, I think, because if he would be perfectly within his rights to go with a central midfield pairing of Joe Newell and Jimmy Jago when they go to Ross County, purely because we know, and he knows, that combination works well. That I think you might need a little bit of dig against Ross County. Obviously, Derek Adams' comments after their own game on Saturday could make it interesting this weekend. Certainly, we don't want to see a game as bad as the one on Saturday from his point of view. But it's the optics. I don't think would be great if Levitt was dropped to the bench for Saturday's game. But at the same time, it's perfectly legitimate. It's a perfectly legitimate call to make, to say, you know what, I'm going to go with Joe and Jimmy Jago as my midfielders, because I want a combination of sort of, the all-action, box-to-box type Joe Newell alongside the kind of midfield scrapper in Jago. And we know they've worked well together in the past. I think, we certainly discussed in previous discussions, we've sort of said, is there any merit in breaking them up, and sort of forcing another player in there, or should you kind of stick with them until such point where it needs to be changed? And I think, I would be surprised if after the sort of first 45 minutes in Perth, which was pretty eye-bleeding, to be honest. It was just, there wasn't really. I don't really recall anything of note happening apart from St Johnstone having a goal ruled out for offside. And even then, that looked sort of really close. Beyond that, there was, there wasn't really a lot, maybe a couple of yellow cards, and that was about it.
Yeah, because I watched the highlights on Sports Scene after, and I think the first half highlights must have lasted about a minute and a half. I might even be being generous there, but it's always quite telling.
And I wouldn't be surprised if, having seen the first 45 minutes, Montgomery has then said to Levitt at halftime, I want more from you. I need you on the ball more. I need you to try and make things happen, because the front four are not getting any, or the front two aren't getting service. The front four, the wingers, are struggling to get much joy down the flanks. And at the same time, you can sort of congratulate St Johnstone for playing a good game that did kind of stifle Hibs. And as you point out, it was a kind of self-inflicted error that led to their goal. if they don't, if that doesn't happen, then maybe Hibs get a point, and rather than everyone kind of overreacting a little bit, I think would be, or not everyone, but there has been a certain deal of overreaction from some sections of the support. I think a point from McDermott Park would be, not the worst kind of result to take, because Hibs have struggled there in the past. Pitch wasn't great, conditions, etc., as we've talked about. But I just wonder whether Montgomery had said to Levitt, "We need more from you," and there was maybe not kind of panicked, but just more of a kind of, on Levitt's part, more of a sort of determination to make something happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he'll be aware that he's there are 3 of them at the moment competing for those central midfield berths, and ideally you would look to with Newell suspended, you would have looked to Levitt to have played the Newell role and Jeggle to have played the Jeggle role. But obviously, that didn't happen. I just think, I mean, we've actually seen on quite a few occasions when Hibs do play it from the back, it is risky, and it's that kind of risk versus reward. If you get it right, then it can lead to effectively a counter attack. It can lead to just keeping the ball, whatever. And there have been a few hairy moments. There's been sharp intakes of breath in the press box at times when a defender's maybe a little bit dallies on the ball a little bit once they get it from Marshall, or Marshall's a bit kind of hurries one of his passes, and it's not far away from falling into an opposition player's path. But that's what happens when you play that way. There is going to be that element of risk, and I'm obviously, if it's a team like Hibs doing it, then there are going to be mistakes. You are going to have errors, because they're not going to be able to play it perfectly all the time. And so I think you're right. I think that Levitt maybe has maybe had a little bit more harsh treatment from the fans than he maybe warrants. And it's quite funny looking at the position and looking at some of the reactions to Joe Newell in previous seasons, and then he's been sort of such an important player since Montgomery came in, whether it's from set pieces, whether it's just from grabbing games by the scruff of the neck, because I don't think Hibs really have another player like that when he's not in the team. He's just sort of he's kind of rounded. He's got an all-rounded game now. He's perfected this sort of he's got that bit of physicality. He's got the skill. He's got the vision for passes and things like that. And I think this Hibs really missed that, and you would have wanted Levitt to be able to kind of step up and replicate that type of performance, and he didn't.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, yes, let's not sort of jump on the let's not jump on the drop Dylan Levitt bandwagon, but at the same time, we've talked about this before. Montgomery makes sort of 2 to 3 changes usually game to game.
Mm-hmm.
So it perhaps wouldn't be a surprise to see Joe Newell come back in, and just maybe Levitt getting a bit of a rest, because he's played a lot of football since since he came back in to the team after his injury. And I just think whether he's just sort of feeling burnt out a little bit, I don't know. But I would agree with you that he wasn't as influential as you would want him to be on Saturday. There's then the mistake for the goal. So if he's benched for Saturday's game, I don't think you read anything into that other than the manager trying to make changes to hopefully come up with a combination that's got the best chance of winning a football game. I mean, we spoke about Levitt when he first came into the team. He was coming on as a sub for the last sort of 15-20 minutes when he was working his way back from injury. He looked really good. I remember came on against Hearts at Tynecastle, and played a big part in Hibs sort of kind of controlling the latter stages of that game. There were other games where he came on sort of midway through the second half, and it wasn't really. Sometimes he brings subs on, and the kind of the flow of play kind of breaks down, or it's just disrupted. But he was sort of not so much as keeping it consistent, but sort of bringing something more to it. And I just think, I mean, it seems unfair to single him out after Saturday, because there were a lot of players like that, a lot of players who you could sort of say you want. I mean, Boyle and Yuan are the obvious ones. I just felt they were at best on the periphery, and at worst sort of virtually anonymous at times, and that then leads to them to not getting much service. And it's I just go back to the fact that Montgomery is trying to kind of get through these games with. I mean, he doesn't have an obvious starting 11 because of the way he plays, but at the moment it is a little bit sort of it's threadbare. And if your kind of key players, if your talismans aren't performing, or if they're not available like Newell, then the team does actually look pretty kind of ordinary and one-dimensional. And I think that's a concern. Maybe going into Saturday's game, that you need your sort of key players to be performing. You need them to kind of leave everything on the pitch and just essentially sort of try and make things happen, which they didn't do on Saturday. Part of that was down to the way St Johnstone played, but at the same time, you need to find a way past that. You need to, if Hibs don't really have an obvious plan B under Montgomery, then it has to be doing plan A better. But that didn't happen on Saturday. It's got to happen this coming weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just think there were so many different sort of factors in Saturday's performance that affected it. And the level one is difficult because you either give him a chance to make or to sort of atone for his mistake this Saturday, or you give him a rest and you bring back a tried and tested combination that works well together and probably benefits the overall team.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it could be interesting to see what Montgomery does for Saturday's game. I mean, there's also the possibility we see Rocky Bashiri coming back into the starting lineup. There's obviously question marks over Lewis Miller, whether he'll play. We should find out more from the press conference this week. But I think, there's a few players who probably couldn't have any complaints if they found themselves on the bench. This coming weekend after Saturday's performance.
Yeah, aye, exactly. I mean, you could have pointed the finger at any number of players. So just moving on to Saturday's game. Obviously, I mean, I feel that the pressure is really really on here. Not so much in terms of Hibs getting a result or performance, but just the two teams putting on a game that gets the approval of Derek Adams.
Yeah. I mean, managers have all said something that they maybe regret in the aftermath of a defeat, and I think the manner of the defeat must have been particularly hard to take. Sort of injury time winner for the visiting team. After, in Adam's words, his team had been on top throughout. We've seen Hibs this season, throw not throw things away, but be in a position, be in a commanding position, be in a leading position, and then end up drawing late on. St Mirren would be the obvious one. Montgomery never said anything along the lines of, I had the team with the lowest budget in the A-League, and this was, was much better than what I saw tonight. But I think weirdly, I think the comments could actually work in Hibs' favour because, Ross County obviously looked to be, they got the sort of the new manager bounce when Adams came back. I think it could be a new manager bounce when it's a previous manager who comes back, but they did get a lift from him coming in. There were some good results, and then that's 2 defeats on the bounce. And I just wonder whether after the comments and the way they were sort of addressed by just the kind of Scottish football supporting public, I just think, I mean, I'm not really sure it forms the basis of the pre-match team talk for Hibs, but
it certainly makes Derek Adams more difficult, I think.
Yeah, I think
trying to lift his own players.
I think it's an interesting one. It certainly adds something to the game, adds something to the build up, for sure. But you can actually sort of predict what will happen. At the press conference on Tuesday, somebody will ask Nick Montgomery about it, and it'll just be, we just focus on our own team. I don't pay any attention to what other managers say, and you find well that he does. I mean, all managers say this. I don't read the papers. Of course you do. It's one of the greatest myths in football. I don't read the papers. I don't read the headlines.
Yeah. But here's this headline I didn't like.
Yes, which somebody else told me about because I don't read the headlines or the papers. But I think it's I mean, I don't want to turn this into the Ross County Observer, but I think if you're a Ross County player and you're sort of hearing that, then it's not really a great sort of you're not getting a lot of confidence from your manager saying that. But maybe the players might have agreed with it. Maybe it was a poor game. I mean, there's been we've seen a lot of poor games following Hibs for since the start of the season. And there's been some other games in the Scottish Premiership that have been really low in quality, but I think it did seem a little bit hyperbolic to say this is like awful. I don't know why people pay to see this. I've just come from the sort of lowest budget team in League Two in England, and it was never as bad as this. It's maybe it's the kind of thing where he's trying to get a reaction from his players, but. Like I say, I think that could work in Hibs' favour. If there is this little bit of unrest or uncertainty from Adam's comments about how the team's going to play, it's got to be at the back of your mind. I mean, even if he comes in, first training session this week and said, "Sorry about that, lads. Heat of the moment, got a little bit carried away in what I said. Just business as usual." You're going to have it at the back of your mind. You're going to be thinking, but." Yeah. It wasn't just a throwaway comment. It was quite a sustained attack on, your own team and Scottish football in general. So I think, that could work in Hibs' favour if they do follow what Montgomery likes to do, which is just focusing on them and how they can beat Ross County. And I think it might well feature in in some of the sort of pre-match stuff this week. And how could it not? Mm-hmm. And I think. I mean, my sort of gut feeling is going on what we've seen before from Montgomery's Hibs team, it will be a much improved performance. Whether or not it will be improved to the extent that they can take 3 points, I think remains to be seen, because there's also the possibility that Adam's comments will, have the desired effect on the Ross County team, and we could actually get, a wonderful footballing spectacle this Saturday. We can sort of live in hope, but it's a place that Hibs have sort of struggled at. Previously, they have obviously won there, but there's been some forgettable performances. There's been some kind of midweek games that have ended in draws or defeats, and it's going back to the game in Perth that the conditions probably won't be great. You've got that sort of it's a small tight stadium, and I mean Jordan Abita was speaking after the St Johnstone game and saying it doesn't affect them. But you'll be used to playing at Easter Road. The players are used to having sort of very vocal home crowd behind them. They have sort of got more points at Easter Road under Montgomery than they have away from home, although it's close. But I think the main thing is they haven't lost at Easter Road, and that's obviously not a coincidence. And I think coming at the end, I mean that's the fourth game away from home in a row after. What was it? Dundee, Celtic, Livingston. No, that can't be right.
Celtic. The Aberdeen game was sandwiched in there. The token home game.
St Johnstone, Ross County got there in the end. There's trips in there like Perth isn't a quick trip up the motorway. Neither's Dingwall. It's probably no surprise the players are feeling a bit, probably feeling a bit jaded, feeling a bit, kind of. It's tiring when you're travelling so much. And I know that obviously St Johnstone and Hibs agreed to bring that game forwards from, I think it was December the 30th originally, which probably helps them to have more of a gap between the derby and the Motherwell game on January the 2nd. But, it's now looking a little bit like, perhaps it might be best to keep that for that time period and then just get a bit of a break. But you can't really predict what's going to happen in terms of injuries and
exactly
and stuff like that. And, you look back to the Livingston game and you think, well, the good thing is that we've got another game next week. We've beaten Livingston. We didn't play too badly against Celtic. There were some good bits, and then we built on that with a win at a place we've struggled at previously. Then keep the momentum going. And it hasn't worked out like that, obviously, but. I think Saturday's game is a chance for them to do what they've done under Montgomery before, which is to bounce back from, a poor performance and a poor result and, kind of get back on the horse, for want of a better description. I think you've got, we talked about the derby aspect of that with players trying to impress before the team selection for that. And, you've got the possible possible factor of Ross County not really knowing what's going on with Adam's comments. So it's a very difficult one to call. You know, I mean, you throw into that the fact that there probably will be changes to the Hibs team. You know, it could be very different. I think the one thing that I think Montgomery will be working on this week is that when you look at the number of shots that Hibs had in his first few games compared to the opposition and compared to how many shots Hibs are having now or not having, as the case may be.
It's dropped off, hasn't it?
And that's got to be a concern. You know, I think whether it's sort of changing up the personnel, I mean, we know he's not going to deviate much from the kind of 4-4-2, but you know, do you bring Josh Campbell back into that kind of supporting striker role? Do you move Boyle out wide again? You know, there's a lot of options that he has, I think, with the players he has available to change it around. And I think for me that's the sort of main thing that they'll be working on this week is just trying to get more opportunities, trying to get more you know, more shots on goal, and not just shots on goal, but shots on target. Which is obviously was the downfall against St Johnstone. They only, I think, had one, maybe two shots on target in the victory over Kilmarnock. Didn't have a great amount of shots on target against Livingston either, and it was, you know, a case of, you know, they took their chances in those games and, you know, it worked out. And then they didn't take their chances against St Johnstone. Well, they didn't create chances against St Johnstone, and it culminated in a defeat. So, you know, I would hope that this week, you know, the players and Montgomery can work on something that will see them return to, you know, the way they were playing earlier on in his tenure, because it's the same players. You know, I know they're going to be tired after a lot of games. You've got the injuries, you've got a little bit of, you know, disruption with players dropping out, like Lewis Miller dropping out with the suspension and then possibly being injured. You had Jordan Abita missing a game. You've had Joe Newell missing through suspension and stuff like that. But, you know, I mean, the players are capable of, the players are at least capable of raising, you know, their game to the level that it was when Montgomery first came in. You know, that obviously you get the new manager bounce effect, but at the same time, you know, regardless of whether the players are, you know, all sort of suited to this style of play, I think the players that he's got, until he gets to January at least, the players that he's got should be and have shown themselves to be capable of at least putting in better performances. And I think, you know, that has to be the minimum going into this weekend.
Yeah, I think the kind of return of some sort of attacking spark feels like the most important thing going up to Ross County, because you feel like, you know, if Hibs can do that, then it's one of those where, you know, take nothing for granted, but the result should take care of itself if they can find that bit more kind of attacking fluidity. I think you maybe, you know, it's clearly, you made a great point with the number of shots dropping off, and it has quite markedly. I think maybe do you take into account as well the fact that, you know, opposition teams are, you know, they've got much better idea of what Hibs are going to throw at them under Nick Montgomery. I think they'll be looking at stats and they'll see that, you know, in terms of, you know, Hibs are not a team who really look to get crosses into the box. I think when you look at that kind of style of playing, what the numbers are saying, it's like they are kind of among the lowest in the league for the percentage of, you know, balls that they play that are crosses into the box. It's not something they look to, you know, to do, just throwing balls in there. It's all kind of geared to, you know, sort of working ways through the opposition. And I think there does seem to be an element of teams have kind of got to grips a wee bit with what Hibs are going to try and do to them. You know, those kind of, you know, the goal at Dundee being the, you know, the perfect example. You know, Boyle's goal at Livingston, you know, working the ball into the box, kind of quick runs, quick transitions. And there was always going to be an element of that, because, you know, it's when a new manager comes in, there is a sort of an unknown, you know, for the opposition as well as to what he's going to try and get his team to do. But I think, you know, it's not like, I think it's not a kind of insurmountable problem. There's more than enough talent in that forward line to, you know, to start hitting the back of the net again. But it's the same maybe throughout the rest of the team as well. Obviously, there's been injuries in other areas. Guys have come in and out. I think we started to see, I think, you know, an improvement in the back line over a certain number of games when there was a bit more consistency and personnel. And I know it's enforced at times, and, you know, the manager wants to rotate. But there's been kind of changes up in the forward line as well. We've kind of seen Eli Yuan come in and out. He was out the team for a few weeks. Josh Campbell came in. I thought it worked quite well, that set up with sort of himself and Martin Boyle quite interchanging. One would come into the centre, one would go out to the right. But again, it's changed again, and we're not sort of seeing that so much now. We've seen Boyle go through the middle. Jair's kind of made that position on the left his own at the moment, whereas you'd maybe expect to have seen Yuan there before. So there is a kind of turnover in terms of who's playing where, and I just wonder as well if that's maybe having some sort of effect, because there was guys on Saturday, you touched on Boyle and Yuan earlier, where they struggled to get into it at all, and it's as if there just wasn't much kind of process in what they were trying to do. I know the kind of freeformness and the fluidity is important, but I think there obviously needs to be some sort of at least semi-structure within that, in terms of what guys are looking to be, the runs they're looking to make. And it's becoming a wee bit of a pattern as well that Dylan Vente just struggles to get into the game at all.
Yeah,
I think you can. He had that streak near the start of the season where I think did he score was it something like 5 goals from 5 shots on target, and that was always something that was going to. Nobody can sustain that level of efficiency really. That was always going to drop off at some point, and I just think finding a way to get him into the game more. And I'm not talking. I think there's been it's been kind of observed that he'll maybe try and come in and drop deep, and is that the classic sort of sign of a frustrated striker just wanting to get involved in the game, really, because people would maybe want to see him between the posts a bit higher up. But I just think finding a way to get him involved a bit more is kind of imperative, because I think he's one of those guys that you can see whenever he gets the ball that he is just a good player. It doesn't you don't need to watch him for long to see that. So yeah, just to get back to the original point, I think the most important thing, especially getting into Edinburgh Derby, where Hibs are going to, the onus is going to be on Hibs to be aggressive and try and you've got to be on the front foot when you're at home to Hearts. It's a non-negotiable for a Hibs team, really, isn't it? That'd be the main thing that I think I'd want to see going up the road this weekend. It's just the return of some sort of attacking inspiration, because it's a team that's set up to attack, and if it doesn't work, then you don't always fancy them to grind out results the way they did at Livingston, and obviously that it played out like that on Saturday. Because I think that is the last thing that kind of fans probably want to see, is another slog over the line either way. Whether it results in 3 points or more drop points. I think it's just you just kind of want to see that return to some sort of attacking fluidity, because the players are. I think the players are there. Certainly, the standard in this league, they're more than capable, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that, and I think it has been maybe difficult for Montgomery in that he's come in. It's not it's not his squad. The players are not his players. And obviously there are individuals in that team who are suited to the way he wants to play. I think we've seen that with some players. We've seen that with the way they've kind of adapted and in some cases improved. But I just think you do kind of feel for him a little bit, because he has. Not having Lafondra in there has really kind of, even as an option off the bench, has really kind of limited his options in attack, or in the centre forward positions. And it's maybe one of those things where the fact that you've got like Boyle and Yuan can both play out wide, or they can sort of play through the middle. And I know that he tends to use Boyle there more than Yuan, but it's an advantage to have players with that sort of level of flexibility, but it can also be a disadvantage as well, because it allows for like too much tinkering and the sort of pursuit of goals and the pursuit of shots on target. I think I wrote this in one of the pieces I did over the weekend, looking back at the St Johnstone game, that I wouldn't be surprised to see Josh Campbell sort of coming back into that like more attacking role. I don't know how you sort of combine that. Do you play him with Vente? Do you put Vente on the bench and put Boyle alongside Campbell? Do you put Boyle out to the flanks? Do you drop one of Yuan Tavares? There's a lot of options what Montgomery can do. But I mean, he strikes me as the kind of guy who will know, you know, he will have sort of like methods to try and turn these things around. You know, I don't think it's, you know, we're not going to see him rock up at Ross County with, you know, 7 changes to the lineup, a change in formation. You know, he's got a way of playing, he's got a style of playing, and you know, I don't expect to see too much deviation. We've talked about this before that, you know, if Plan A doesn't work, then you just do it better, which I think is, you know, it's an interesting approach. But I mean, you know, we've seen Plan A work very, very effectively against some teams. We've also seen it not work, you know, maybe as well as it might against others. But you know, I think Montgomery will have seen enough on Saturday to know what needs to change for Ross County, what needs to be worked on the training ground. Whether that's, you know, somehow getting more service to Dylan Vente, whether it's, you know, changing the personnel, even just having, for instance, Joe Newell back in the midfield or Rocky Bashiri driving forward. You know, little things, little tweaks that can sometimes have, you know, a much bigger impact. And you know, I don't think he's the sort of manager to sort of, you know, look at Saturday in Perth and then say, you know, we'll just go again and hopefully it'll be better. You know, he'll have things that he, you know, maybe would want to try. For all we know, there were things he wanted to do against St Johnstone, but didn't want to, you know, didn't feel he could risk players if they're maybe not 100%. You know, we've seen this before where players have been fit enough for a place on the bench, but he hasn't played them, and it's all about sort of trying to avoid, you know, having players out for a longer period of time than is maybe necessary. And I think, I mean, I don't know. You know, you've got the derby coming up. You've also got players who are going to be going away to the Africa Cup of Nations. You've got players going away to the Asian Cup. You know, I don't know if that's maybe, you know, playing on players' minds a little bit. I mean, if I was Martin Boyle, having missed, you know, a previous Asian Cup and the last World Cup, knowing that this might well be my sort of last chance to play in a major tournament for, you know, my country, it might be playing on my mind a little bit. And you know, it might be having an effect on performances. Yeah, you don't know. You know, I don't think that's the case. We've certainly, you know, seen the way he played against Livingston. You know, there was still that spark. There was still, you know, he still gave the defence a tough time. And you know, every player, especially wingers, you know, they're inconsistent. They have off days. But I think, you know, the carrot of the derby coming up and the fact that Hibs are now getting to, you know, the end of the sort of festive schedule, and you know, there are a few more days in between games. You know, you would hope that some players who maybe haven't been risked previously might be in a position to contribute on Saturday, and you know, that could you know, that could make all the difference. So I do think it's little things. You know, I think Montgomery said this at the start of his tenure, or close to the start of his time in charge, that it's not about sort of making wholesale changes overnight. It's about sort of bringing in sort of, you know, smaller changes, but more frequently, more consistently. And you know, I just feel that he'll have something up his sleeve for Saturday's game. I'd be very surprised if it's a sort of another slog or another game like the St Johnstone game. I mean, we say that now. I mean, if you could be disappointed, but I just think, you know, I think it all comes down to the fact that this is a manager who is playing with, you know, a squad of players that he has had no say over the signings of, some of whom aren't well suited to the way he wants to play. He's got injuries to key players to deal with, and yet he's still, you know, the team has obviously made progress under his watch. They've only lost 3 league games, and 2 of them have been the Celtic and Rangers. That's not bad. And
yeah, definitely.
You can argue that yes, there are games they should have won, but at the same time, there's games they've won that they probably wouldn't under previous management, and games they've drawn that they probably would have lost as well. So I think, you know, it's. I mean, I said this in one of the pieces I did at the weekend. You know, obvious progress has been made, but you know, Saturday just reminded us that like, Hibs are still very much a team that's a work in progress. And I think until we get to January and players get back from injuries, and there's, you know, potentially you know, additions made in the transfer window, I just think it is what it is. I don't think you're really going to see a huge amount of change in the way Hibs are playing just yet. but at the same time, they should have enough to be, they should have enough to get a result, or at the very least, a much improved performance in Dingwall, and the derby will take care of itself, I think. And then you've got Motherwell. Motherwell are not having, the best of seasons, but he's still not to be underestimated. And then you've got the winter break, and I think at the moment it's just a case of, get over the line to the winter break, and then sort of reset, assess the way things are going, what needs to change, and I think, I think if they can have a strong end to the sort of first half of the season, and then a good January, players coming back, possible new additions, then I think the second half of the season we're probably going to be more likely to see more of what we saw at the start of Montgomery's tenure compared to the last sort of couple of games.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all from us today, folks, and it's onwards and upwards to Dingwall at the weekend. As I said earlier, we'll have a sort of more in-depth look at the numbers behind Saturday's defeat on our website later on today, and as always, we'll be bringing you kind of full preview and analysis ahead of this Saturday's game as Hibs head up to Ross County in search of just a kind of momentum regaining win ahead of their Edinburgh derby, and we'll be there to cover every minute of it. So thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you.